So I was a good kid in high school. Well, all growing up, really. I was really malleable, and so my family convinced me, you want to focus on school, you want to focus on extracurricular activities, you don't want to do drugs, you don't want to drink, you don't want to have sex, you just want to succeed in life. And I thought that that's just like what life was, and I was just easily controlled and convinced. And then I turned 18 and I found out that the reason my parents didn't want me to get a job is because I was gonna inherit close to $250,000 anyway. And the reason why my parents didn't want me to do drugs and alcohol is because I come from a whole family of addicts and they were afraid of the same thing happening. And I wasn't ready for college, but my family said, you're 18, you gotta go to college or move out. And I wasn't ready to live on my own either. So I ended up going to Syracuse, which was, I didn't really want to go to Syracuse. I wanted to go to school for music, but I had a teacher in high school who convinced me that going to school for music, I wouldn't make any money. So I put my dreams aside and I went for like some major psychology that I had no interest in. And I was drunk within a week for the first time. But I was dropping out because I was struggling with alcohol use and depression by the time I was like 2/3 of the way through my first semester. So I went from straight A kid graduating top of my class to dropping out of college. And that pattern continued, except that pattern started to look like taking antidepressants and mixing them with alcohol and just dropping out and dropping out and dropping out until I had dropped out of college 4 times and spent all my inheritance, gone $44,000 in debt, filed for bankruptcy, and moved back in with my family. And by that point, I decided that I needed to do something so that I wouldn't feel like a failure anymore. I was still an alcoholic, and I still was using drugs recreationally, but I wanted to get a degree. I wanted to do something that made me feel like I had some value because I had pretty much lost all of the self-worth that I had. I had been in abusive relationships. I had done drugs that I never thought I would do even when I had started doing drugs. And college really validated me. I hit the books. I was very successful. I was top of my class, and focusing on school during the week and then partying on the weekends was fine, and it was sustainable until it wasn't. I am bipolar mildly, so I'm not medicated, and I don't have any severe, depressive episodes or manic episodes. Sometimes the guys in the house will notice that I'm a little bit manic, but it's never anything that gets extreme. But when I was actively using, it did get extreme because you can't mix bipolar with drinking heavily every weekend, and you can't do that. And I had to drop out my junior year for a semester to deal with my mental health problems. During that time, I overdosed on opiates. I had a suicide attempt. I went on medication for bipolar that I almost immediately started mixing with alcohol until my alcoholism was the worst it had ever been. I was drinking 5 or 6 nights a week, and my life was a disaster. After I attempted suicide, I realized I needed to make a change, and I went back to school, and I did well for a little while, finishing up my degree until towards the end of my degree, I wasn't doing well, and I relapsed back on hard drugs, and the next thing I knew, I was breaking up out of a 3-year relationship because of my infidelities and drug usage, and I was completely broke. I was jobless. It all went downhill so fast. It was incredible how I had just spent the last 5 years of my life being completely successful in school, except for one little hiccup where I took some time off. And the self-esteem that I got from finishing my degree didn't really outweigh the loss of it from all the crazy stuff that followed. And having low self-esteem can lead an addict to really dark places, because if we're at a point where we already don't care about ourselves and what happens to ourselves, we'll do terrible things to ourselves, and we'll let other people do terrible things to us. And that's exactly what I did. And when I got sober, I didn't want to get sober. It's weird, you know, a lot of people, like, they want to get sober. They want to do it, and they just don't know how. I didn't wake up that day and say I want to be sober. I woke up that day and I had been in an abusive relationship, and it had just gone too far, and I knew the only reason that I was tolerating it was because tolerating it got me free drugs, and it wasn't worth it anymore. I just had a moment where my self-esteem told me, like, you're worth more than this. And I walked right out that door with a bag of clothes that I could carry, and I went home with my parents, and they drove me to a treatment center. And I was unwilling at first because of how hard it was going to be, and I ran away from treatment. Very next day, walked right off the property, disappeared for 14 hours. They found me a day and a half, and like 3 towns away. I just hid in the woods, and they somehow let me back in. And after that, I never looked back. I found the willingness. I stuck it out. I learned about resentments and how they lead us to using, and I realized that I had a lot of resentment for my family. I strongly resented my family. I knew that I wasn't ready to move out of the house when I was 18. I knew I wasn't ready to go to college, you know. And so I held that against them for a long time. And I knew I wasn't over that. And I needed to do the step work, and I needed to process these resentments. Otherwise, if I moved back in with my family, I was just gonna relapse. I was just gonna be around the people who I hated and couldn't figure out why I hated them, because I was supposed to love them. And I needed to come here to a house that was 12-step based. That was one of my requirements when I talked to my case manager about what I was looking for in a sober house. I said, I want to be required to do the 12 steps, because I have a list of resentments a mile long. I am still doing my turnarounds. I just did all the turnarounds on my mother last night. That was crazy. To write about all the things about my mother that I can't stand, and then find a way to process it and see my part in it, and how to forgive her. And you know, it's mind-blowing. This is the work that I was doing just last night is the whole reason why I came to the Freeman House in the first place. And I mean, yeah, so I've been here for like 10 months and I'm finally doing it. But you know, I had to do the steps at my own pace. I supposedly did steps 1, 2, and 3 in rehab, but like, I felt rushed. I got a new sponsor, and I took my time, and I read those first 100 and so pages of AA, and I took notes of every single little detail that related to me and how I related to it. And then I talked to my sponsor about it, and we prayed. And then I had to figure out that, like, I was bouncing around from sponsor to sponsor, and I was avoiding finding a sponsor that I was ever going to read anything to honestly. And I had to figure out that that was because I was afraid to do the work. And I had to figure out that I wasn't going to say any of this to a sponsor until I found a sponsor who was queer. Because I'm not telling some straight man that I don't know all this crazy stuff. I'm just not going to do it. And so that for me was a light bulb that went off. And I found my current sponsor, who identifies as bisexual, and now I write. Now I actually sit there with the notebook, and I'm actually willing to put the pen to paper and write down everything without leaving anything out. You know, With all the earnestness at our command, we beg you to be thorough and fearless from the very start. It's one of the quotes from AA. And if I wasn't going to be thorough and fearless from the very start, then like, what was I doing here? This is why I came here, was to do the steps properly. And so when I found that sponsor, his name's Robert, it really opened things up for me. And I'm well on my way now to completing my 4th step. I'm more than halfway done the turnarounds on my resentments, and then I just have a few more steps left. It's hard. It's really hard writing about a trauma and then figuring out how you were selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and fearful. I still, I've done hundreds of them, and I still look at some of these and I say, you want me to find my part in this? Like, how? And then I just pray for guidance, and sometimes it comes to me right away. Sometimes I need to sit there. Sometimes I need to move on and come back. But doing the work, that's what this place is about. You ask Sean, what got you sober? And it's like, partially God, but like, he didn't just accidentally find God. He found God through doing the 12 steps. And that's what Sean will tell you got him sober, was the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe that, and I believe that it works. And that's why I'm here, because this house makes me do it when I don't want to do it.